Well, we're already a little behind, so let's go ahead and get into this. This week's topic is continuing the therapeutic intervention. So the subtopic is cryotherapy and thermotherapy. Some people would argue it is the same thing because that's all thermotherapy, and we're just playing with hot and colds and ends of the spectrum. But regardless, we'll get into this. So it starts for me with kind of understanding the physics of how these different therapeutic interventions actually work. So if you understand how the physics work, then you can manipulate these variables in your favor. Understanding the mechanisms of action and how these things are actually taking place within the body, and what they're doing to different tissues or different cells. Then we'll get into the different types of cryotherapy and thermotherapy, and then we'll break down some of the literature. I'm sure I will rant a little bit along the way, but definitely by the time we get to the literature review and then the selected literature for this week, then we'll definitely start to break down some of the finer details and the nuances. So for the physics, this is kind of the basics of thermotherapy, is how is heat or temperature actually converted. There's actually some interesting kind of nuanced perspectives or arguments of application of cold, or is it the removal of heat? And so when you think about what is heat, heat is energy, and it is transferred to one object or from one object to the other. So the presence of heat is actually the presence of energy. And so when you're removing heat, or if you're applying quote unquote cold, you're actually just taking heat away from whatever the object that it's pressing on. So I heard this argument a long time ago, and I don't remember where, so I can't give a source for it. But the argument is that nothing is truly cold; it is just absent of heat. And so when some cold object like a snowball hits your face, and you're like, "Oh my God, that's so cold," actually it's just absent of heat, and it's taking the heat away from your face, and you feel that temperature change because the heat is leaving your face. So I think that that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. It's the same kind of argument with like force. Like there's no real way of quote unquote absorbing force. We talk about like landing, right? And your landing mechanics, you're absorbing force. No, not really. You're producing force at a different rate of force development, so that you are either more compliant in your landing or more stiff in your landing. But there's no real absorption of force. You're just accepting it at different speeds. So it's the same kind of argument with heat, but the heat is the actual unit of energy that you're measuring. So this image does a really good job of illustrating the different methods of heat transfer. And so you have solar radiation. Anytime you hear radiation, you can think rays, energy rays, so whether that be light or otherwise. And then when you get to the conduction, that is the direct transfer from things that are touching. So if you touch something and it feels cold, you are transferring your heat to that object, or the object is stealing your heat, whichever way you want to look at it. You then have convection, which is more it's less direct. So you have air or water that's passing by, and then it's still a transfer of energy, but it's not object to object. It's object to whether it's wind and it's dissipating that heat, it's just moving it away. Or if it's in the case of water, then it's taking it into the water. So the convection is a less direct method of heat transfer. And then the last one here, well, there's two more here. So conversion is a little bit nuanced, and some people wouldn't even include it in this conversation. But conversion is you are taking one method of energy and you're converting it into a different style of energy. So for example, mechanical stimulus goes in and then heat comes out. So that would be friction. You are providing one form of energy, which is mechanical. You're creating this rubbing effect, and then you are getting heat on the back end, which is a different style of energy on the other side of it, and then that is basically converting the energy type. The similar argument I've seen made is with ultrasound. It goes in as electrical current, that is electrical energy, and it comes out as a thermo energy unit, and so then it's converting from electrical to thermal, and then that is the conversion. And then the last one here is the evaporation. So this one is pretty easily recognized with sweat or steam. But basically, it's turning a solid form of water, or I suppose liquid, if you will, into a gaseous form, and then the evaporation then transfers the heat into the water, and then it's carried away that way. Any comments, questions about the physics so far? It's kind of a refresher on your basic physics and thermotherapy 101.
So I know last week you talked about manual therapy. Would it
Mm-hmm.
be fair to say that manual therapy is almost a form of heat therapy in the fact you're converting mechanical energy into some form of heat energy?
I think that there is an argument to be made for that. And I try to think about this. I actually thought about writing a full book on this, where I think that most treatments that we do have multifactorial components to them. It's not as straightforward as we assume them to be. And I think the easiest example of this is with cupping. Everybody says, "Oh, well, cupping it's cutting off the blood supply and it creates this hypoxic environment, and then that's what creates this new, whether it's angiogenesis or whatever the metabolic response is." We are thinking of it in terms of the chemical atmosphere that we're creating. We're removing oxygen from the area, and then that kills off some cells, and then that leads to regeneration. But we don't consider the fact of, well, what are we doing mechanically? We have a stretch of some cells because we're pulling it up and into the cup. We also have compression of some cells because the edge of the cups is definitely digging down in there. And this is evident when you take those cups off. You see this compressed ring, but then you also see this raised bubble where that skin was up in the cup. And so we don't think about what are we doing mechanically. We don't think about what are we doing, whether it's chemical or thermal or all of these different things that can have effect on the body. Neural is another one that I think is often overlooked in treatment. I mean, we talk about pain all the time, but we don't really understand what the neural responses to these things are. And so we just look at it like really simply and kind of ignorantly, I guess, where we're like, oh, well, it decreased pain, so it's got a good effect on nerves. But like, that's such a, like, 100 years from now, we're going to look back at this and just be like, we had the general gist that this is therapeutic, but we had no idea the mechanisms of action. So long-winded answer, but yes, I think that there are components of thermal in the massage, for example, and so I'll play around with these variables myself. Sometimes you want more friction, sometimes you want less, and so sometimes you can apply more if you're using a lotion or some kind of a massage cream. If you want less friction, then you apply more of that, because then your hands are going to glide over the superficial tissue. You don't dig as deep, you cause less irritation to their skin. But because you're causing less friction, you get less thermal transfer, you get less deep penetration down into the underlying tissues. So these are variables that you can kind of tweak, where you're like, okay, well, do I want an environment where there is friction, or do I not? Do I want an environment where there's heat or not? And so you can play around with those depending on what your desired outcome is. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, well, I'm just going to rub this muscle and it's going to feel better.
Right. Yeah, and I like the point that you made that a lot of these different treatment options are multifactorial in nature, and it's not just providing a metabolic change or a mechanical change. And to dive a little bit deeper, I think it's interesting.
I think that will ultimately, once we have a better grasp of the more, like, we talk about holistic treatments, but we don't understand like half of what we're doing to the body alone, let alone the mental aspect of it. And so I think if we can better pin down the effects that we're applying on these different treatments, even like simple things, right? Like things that we think we have a really good understanding of, and we'll go through this in the literature with cryotherapy, things that have been around for hundreds of years and we think we understand very well. You look at like the nuances of these different applications, and it's like, oh yeah, well, you put cold on something and the pain goes away. Okay, well, how cold? Does it need to be 33 degrees? Does it need to be 31 degrees? What is the appropriate cold level? How deep does the tissue need to be the temperature change? How long do we need to leave that duration of cold? Like all of these different variables, we have no idea what the longitudinal effects are of our treatment effects or of our treatment input.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to take up more of your time. I know we're a little bit behind, but I just can't
No,
help
no,
it.
no, all good. I don't mind. I don't
Yes.
mind elaborating. I just wanted to make sure that we got started.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can spend all day talking about this stuff now that we're actually started. So, on topic, mechanisms of action. So we look at the different things that we're doing, and again, like this is kind of how I think about it in my daily practice. But also, like I think that I might write a book where I will kind of break down the different effects of these different treatment options, where we think about massage being largely mechanical, and we're compressing these tissues, and we're getting some kind of a mechanical relaxation of the muscle or lengthening of the muscle is what some people think you're doing. But what are we doing chemically? When we compress these tissues for some extended amount of time, what are we doing to the circulation? What is the increase of circulation composed of? Does the actual inflammatory response, does that change based on the duration of or the application of our massage? What are we doing neurally? Are we increasing the sympathetic or the parasympathetic nervous system? And I wish I dove more into this in the massage and soft tissue treatment, but something I think about a lot is, am I trying to activate and wake this person up, or am I trying to sedate and relax this person, or this even locally at the level of the muscle? Do I want this individual muscle more active or less active? So when it comes to thermotherapy, what are we doing to the largest consideration by far is the vascular implications. Most of the time, people are going to argue that heat will increase vasodilation, whereas cold will increase vasoconstriction. And then these have secondary effects where we are getting less circulation to the area or more circulation to the area. And then as a byproduct of having more or less circulation, we're going to have more or less of these inflammatory markers, things like your either your neutrophils and your immune response, your macrophages later down the line, or any kind of cytokines that are being brought to the area. There's a million different things that are being transported in the blood, and it's not as easy as most people on the internet are just going to say, oh, increased circulation, that's bringing good things to the area. This is where I think that it's like comical how little we know about the human body and our intended effects of treatments. What are maybe some of the complications of, okay, well, we have let's say we throw an ice bag on somebody and we get vasoconstriction for the next 20 minutes. How long does that stay vasoconstricted? Because then you start to get, okay, well, some people have argued about this theoretical hunting response, where you actually get this sudden burst of vasodilation in response to a cryotherapy. How do you explain that? Like what is the proposed mechanism of this hunting response? Why is it that cryotherapy is vasoconstrictive to a point, but then all of a sudden it causes vasodilation? I think it's very poorly understood. Then you look at, okay, even further down the line, okay, well, we know that we cause vasoconstriction, and let's just rule out hunting response and just forget about it for the time being. What does vasoconstriction do chemically to this, either the cellular level or to the tissue level? What is it doing to the individual as a whole? What are they experiencing more holistically? What is this individual going to experience if they have vasoconstriction? Are they going to have more pain? Are they going to have less pain? Are they going to have more function, less function? Are they going to compensate more? Are they going to have neural inhibition? Are they going to have any kind of mechanical rigidity, where you get now this muscle tissue is less pliable and you can't work with it as much? We know that there's transient effects on strength and power and response time. Like there's all of these effects that we don't even consider when we are going through our treatments, because we're just like, oh yeah, put ice on it to vasoconstrict and then they will have less swelling. It's like, well, that's one of 7 effects. And there's probably more than that, but Like I said, this is kind of the foundation of, I think, the way of thinking that we need to get to.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that you bring up, and it makes me think of physical therapy and how we can just become so accustomed to what we grew up seeing other PTs do. Like I'll give you an example. Typical outpatient PT is somebody comes in with shoulder pain, you throw a shoulder pack on there for 10 minutes, and then you begin. And to your point earlier, you mentioned that okay, heat is going to help vasodilate. Theoretically, getting more blood flow to that area can help improve tissue healing. But at the other on the other side of that, heat may make somebody more sleepy. Are they going to want to perform their exercises with as much intent if they're fatigued now? So yeah, just taking all of these modalities and thinking about all the other possible outcomes that they might bring.
Yeah, for sure. And especially, you might not see it in, well, I suppose you would in PT, like post op, right? Like they come in 3 days post op. Are you going to throw a hot pack on there? Probably not. They're going to swell up because of all the increased circulation. And what is swelling going to do for the area? It's going to make them more painful rather than less. So
Mhm.
maybe, and sometimes are going to be your two favorite words.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay, so getting into the weeds here a bit with the cryotherapy and the different applications. There's a million different variations, and they're coming out with new ones every day. So I probably don't have all of them listed here. This is probably not exhaustive anymore. Probably back in the late 20 teens, I would say this is probably pretty good, but now there's probably a lot more that I don't have listed up here. And because like ice is becoming this multi-trillion-dollar industry, there's actually like a lot of like, I would say, technological advancement with this treatment in specific. So the oldest and probably the most popular is the ice bag. And this is your typical crushed ice cubes that are thrown in a bag, plastic bag, thrown on the skin. And there's obviously a lot more complexity that goes into it than just that. There's the thickness of the ice, there's the texture of the ice. How well does it conform to the skin? Does the going back to the physics slide, if you have larger ice cubes, you have less contact with the skin. We know that convection is much slower transfer of heat than conduction is. So if you can get more surface area on that contact between the ice and the skin, then you can cause greater decreases in skin temperature. We don't know if that's good or bad, but we know that we can modulate that variable given the size of our ice. Similarly, you can manipulate the temperature if you go from like ice cubes that will melt as the skin heats it up into the gel cold packs that are you throw these gel packs in the freezer and then they get even colder than ice would, and they stay colder for longer as you apply them. Pros and cons here. I've seen a lot more go wrong with these gel ice packs than I have with ice bags. The gel packs have a much greater, I guess, what would you call it, ability to cause cold-induced urticaria. So you're seeing this kind of blotchiness on the skin. That tends to be transient, although I have seen cases where that will linger as a kind of skin texture. Basically, you cause an ice burn. And that I have seen linger for upwards of a year. Also, because the ice is colder, you have to be careful around these superficial areas where there are superficial nerves. So elbows, for like a lot of baseball pitchers, they love to ice down their elbows after they go throw a lot, or especially like on games where they just threw a ton of high velocity pitches. And you have to be careful of that ulnar nerve because it's very exposed, and that's the biggest one that I've seen documented where you actually cause a pathology because of cryotherapy. But that can be easily avoided if you just put a pad down, some kind of a pad to cover up that superficial ulnar nerve, and you just ice the surrounding tissue, such as the wrist flexors, the forearm flexor mass, triceps, whatever you're trying to decrease the temperature of. Ice massage is used, I would say, semi-frequently in the athletic training world. I don't think it's as much as ice bag or ice bath even. And I would say this is probably a little bit more in the PT world, at least it used to be. And this one can be, you get that kind of dual stimulus that we were talking about before, where you get the thermal effects of the ice, but then you're also getting a mechanical stimulus of the massage. And so this is where you kind of play around. Okay, well, do I want a stationary bag of ice, or do I want something that's actually moving and applying a mechanical stimulus? Pros and cons, you have to decide as a clinician which one makes the most sense for this pathology, for this individual, for this current presentation. For the ice bath, and this one's definitely a popular option now with the, what's the name of that brand that's cold plunge, all the different cold plunge options, and everybody is like making it cool. They're like, oh, I'm biohacking now because I can jump in a cold tub and I do the hard things like David Goggins tells me to do. And so this has gotten very popular on social media, where everybody's like, well, I get in colder water than you, or I stay in it longer than you. And it's like, okay, well, you're not even considering like the pros and cons of why you should do this. You're just literally jumping into it because somebody on the internet told you to. So there's, most commonly you see this with more systematic inflammation or systematic soreness, where they're really feeling like fatigued, or they're feeling heavy, they're feeling soreness, and not just like a localized body part like a knee or an ankle, but they're getting it bilaterally, and they're getting it all the way up and down their lower extremity, where it's like, man, I just played a hockey game and my entire body is beat up. The argument against this that I've heard pretty repeatedly is that when you get into an ice bath, we know pretty confidently that it's going to decrease inflammation or delay inflammation. So if you're trying to, especially early on in the season, then you're trying to actually promote inflammation, because then this is going to lead to adaptation. So early in the season, a lot of people will argue that you shouldn't be doing cryotherapy, specifically cold whirlpool, because you want the adaptation and it's the priority over the soreness. Dealing with some soreness early on in the season so that your body can adapt, then you're going to be stronger for the duration of the season. And then as you get closer and closer to postseason, or once you at least get into competitive play, then you can start to use this to manage the inflammation throughout the duration of the season. Your body's already adapted to the loading that we're putting on it. And now it's just a matter of, okay, well, we have a game in 3 more days. We need you to be recovered by then. We know we can decrease the inflammation and make you feel better if we do this, but we don't want you to do this early on in the season, because you're going to lose out on the adaptation. I would argue that we don't know enough about this as a longitudinal effect to say 100% confidently that, one, cold whirlpools are going to stunt your adaptations. It's a theory at this point, but we don't have clinical trials that are showing this. 2, we don't know what the temperatures are of these whirlpools most of the time, and if we do, we don't have studies to say which temperature is better or worse for adaptations. And then 3, like once they're in the season, we don't know if you're doing the ice bath every day, are you getting some kind of resistance to this? Are you getting some kind of diminished return on your investment, where the more you do it, the less effect you see? We don't know. So with 100 more years of research, we'll probably have a better idea. But for right now, I see a lot of people that are very adamant that this is what it is, and I haven't seen hardly any literature to back those claims. Which brings us into something else with very little evidence, and that is cryo chambers and liquid nitrogen. So you get into these rooms or chambers, and they just put liquid nitrogen on you. This is convection, not conduction. And so you're able to, because it's not actually touching you, you can actually get really, really cold without causing any kind of bodily injury. So you'll always see, like, they love to boast their numbers. Oh, ice only gets to 30 degrees, but we can put it minus 200. It's like, well, yeah, but like, that's like saying I never get sunburnt when it's midnight. Like, I go out all the time outside and I never get sunburnt. But if you go outside at 8 a.m., oh, you get sunburned. crazy. Yeah, like when you're doing two different things, they're two different effects, so that makes sense. Any comments, questions about cryotherapy before we move on?
No, I mean, I think earlier as you were speaking, something popped into my head about contrast therapy. I don't know if that's further into the presentation, but I was just kind of wondering what your thoughts were about that.
It's not in the presentation. I probably should have, now that you mention it. Why weren't you here 2 hours ago and then I could have put it in? Um, I have the same thoughts about contrast as I do with most things. It depends, and sometimes maybe. The examples that I've seen it for is usually for some kind of lymphedema where you get this gross swelling, and the idea is that we're creating this mechanical pump because you create vasoconstriction, vasodilation, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. My argument would be you are vasoconstricting and vasodilating blood vessels, and you are not doing that necessarily. Well, I guess we don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen any literature to suggest that we are doing that with the lymphatic vessels. My assumption is that as you create this kind of pump in the vasculature, the veins and the arteries, you're probably seeing similar circulation happening lymphatically, but I don't know if that's 100% the case. The other thing I don't know is effect size. Like, are you going to get more bang for your buck doing that? The downside I've seen with those is, one, you're getting a pump that's probably subpar for just like literally walking when you get that muscular pump. And two, you're in what's called a dependent position for the limb. And so you're fighting gravity because your limb is hanging down. So I have yet to see a method for which people can have an upside down bath that defies gravity, and they're actually sticking their limb up into the pools. And so then you get gravity working for you to pull the swelling out as you're getting this contrast hot, cold. Usually people are putting a foot or an ankle down into it, but then you're probably kind of getting a net neutral where it's like, okay, well, I don't have gravity working for me, so that's bad. But then I also am getting this kind of subpar pump. And so maybe I get some good, maybe it's neutral. I would say it's probably somewhere effect size. Again, I don't have any research to go on, but just my hunch, it's probably either neutral or it's probably like slightly helpful, but probably not going to make that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things. I think that's more of like a supplementation, and the rehab is the bulk, the meat and potatoes.
Gotcha. So, like with most things, the rehab's going to be the meat and potatoes, and using that contrast therapy for lymphedema more as a supplement. I think I found my next business idea. I'm just going to get upside down contrast baths, and we'll see how that goes.
If you could find a way to make that work, it might be a worthwhile idea. I mean, like I said, like they're probably, I don't know the net worth or the worth of that company, the value of that company, but Cold Plunge has to be like a multi-million, if not $1 billion company. Like they're selling cold plunges left and right, and especially with the generation of influencers who can just say whatever they want with no medical or scientific backing. They're like, I do this, you should do this. Like literally, we're in the era of what's his name? Who's the bearded guy who just eats nothing but meat? Liver King. Yeah, like we're in the generation of Liver King claiming he's not on steroids, and then like a week later we find out he's on steroids. It's like, oh, what do you mean? Influencers can lie? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean it was pretty obvious. His six pack had a six pack, so I
mean. Anyway, okay, moving on. So yeah, that's my general hunch on contrast.
Cool.
Types of thermotherapy. And again, this is probably not exhaustive because there's probably different types of newer modalities that are going to apply thermotherapy. But for the most part, just a general overview, there are your traditional hot packs. And this picture is definitely not as cool as the one for cryotherapy. Blame Google Images, not me. Hot packs. This is the typical. You get the clay that's soaked in hot water, and then it's applied. You get these beautiful hot pack covers. I don't understand, how has this been around for like 60 years as a treatment, and we haven't found a more aesthetically pleasing variation of this? Like, can we get some hot pack covers that have like SpongeBob on them or something? Like, I don't understand why it's the same design. Like, we haven't had any kind of improvement or advancement in the technology of hot packs. The clay packs look exactly the same. The covers look exactly the same. The hydrocolators where they're stored look exactly the same. Nothing has advanced. So either that means it's not broken and people aren't looking to fix it, or people are just getting lazy and there's not the billions of dollars that there is in cryotherapy. Ultrasound, this is quote unquote deep heating. So hot packs typically go, I believe, somewhere between 1 and 2 centimeters deep, whereas ultrasound can be somewhere between 3 to 5 centimeters, depending on the application or the parameters that you're setting up. So you can get a little bit deeper. The tissue temperature, this depends on your treatment duration, and some people would argue that you actually never see or feel a tissue temperature difference. You're actually just getting placebo effect. I've seen literature that would suggest otherwise, but I can't tell you 100% confidently. Warm bath, this is the same as a cold water immersion, just with warm water. So you get this warm either tub or bath or cycling where you get the fan that's going around or the jets that blow the water around, which is more helpful for cold than for hot. But we talked about that on a different, I don't remember, maybe that was the modalities. I'm not sure. Anyway, the warm bath is another where you're getting that direct transfer of heat. Water is a really good conductor of heat. And so anytime you're trying to do something with thermal energy, water is a pretty good transmitter of that energy. So if you're trying to transfer heat to the body, then warm water is probably going to do it better than a warm room. But that brings us to the argument of sauna versus steam room. And there does seem to be some variation there in terms of the body's response, specifically, or I suppose one of which is the amount of sweat that you lose. And the steam room definitely makes you sweat more. And this has to do with, one, the evaporation in the room. So you've got much more water content in the room. So you're getting a lot more conduction, convection, and then the evaporation through your sweat. It basically just pulls it out of you, as opposed to sauna is just a really hot room, which would be pretty much exclusively convection, if I have those correct. The paraffin wax is a bit unique, but I think it's also a bit outdated. I haven't seen this as much lately. The only time I've seen it lately has been with gymnastics, and they're trying to drive some kind of a medicine into the skin so that their skin can heal a little bit quicker. And basically, they just get those rips in their hand, those calluses that rip open, and they're just using that paraffin to try to hydrate that area and try to keep things warm so that the body can repair itself a little bit faster. But again, that's kind of a outdated thing. Those baths get absolutely disgusting. If you've ever seen the bottom one after a collegiate season, if you don't have people, like, even if you do have them wash their hands, it still gets gross. But especially if they don't practice good hygiene prior to putting their hand in the paraffin wax, that thing gets disgusting. So I have a feeling that's why it got outdated. But it is one option for thermotherapy. Comments, questions there?
No, nothing too much. I would say that I agree with your take on ultrasound, with it being, well, the possibility of it having a very big placebo effect. I mean, I have one patient who has had back pain for a very long time, and she was just eager to try something new. So she was like, I heard about ultrasound. Can we try it out? And I was like, sure. I mean, we're either going to put some heat on it or try ultrasound. So if you feel like you would get something out of it by trying something new, I'm all for it. So felt good while we were doing it, but it didn't provide any lasting relief, which I wasn't surprised based on her case. But
right. So, I mean, even just take that case study, right? Like you have an individual who's tried hot packs and didn't have relief. Now you get some fancy beeps and some gadgets that they've never seen, or they think that it already works. You've already got patient buy-in. You've already got placebo working in your favor. Like, it's not going to cause you any harm in most cases. I mean, I suppose if you're talking about like ultrasound is absorbed more frequently by dense tissues, more connective tissues, as opposed to soft tissue. So if you're trying specifically to work on superficial like muscle on a relatively lean individual, yeah, maybe hot pack is better. If you've got somebody who's maybe a little bit less lean, a little bit less athletic, and they don't maybe they don't have quite as much muscle to fat ratio, and they've got a higher BMI, maybe to cut through some of that fatty tissue, and you want to get a little bit deeper tissue penetration to actually warm up the muscle. Now you get a little bit better effect from the ultrasound than the hot pack. But either way, you're getting a relatively transient effect because the body's going to go back to its homeostatic environment relatively quickly, especially anything that's circulatory is going to change pretty rapidly. And you can see this, probably the most dramatic effect is go for a long run. Like your heart rate's going to go sky high, probably pushing 200. And then it's going to go back to either your like active heart rate where you're at like 120, maybe 130. And then you're going to get back to your baseline 80, 90, 60 if you're typically fit. But you see these really rapid fluctuations in heart rate, and it can go really high and really low really quickly. So if you're thinking about treatment, anything that's circulatory in nature is going to be pretty transient. Whereas if you look at something more mechanically, you probably see a little bit longer lasting effect. So maybe you go heat or ultrasound into a little bit of what you were talking about earlier with your massage treatment. Now you get a little bit of that mechanical effect to kind of build upon your success with the heat thermotherapy. And then you go from there and you get the biggest bang for your buck in the movement and the actual loading of the tissue that you're going to get as a physical therapist. So you kind of have to coordinate the timing of these different things. And I think the timing matters to some extent, especially if it's a largely circulatory treatment like heat is.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, you had mentioned getting that patient buy-in being one of the more important aspects of trying something different. And she seems to love it while she was getting it. So, I mean, if that's going to make her move a little bit better during the therapeutic exercises, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, and depending on it, what you want to get out of that rehab, like you can reinforce or deny those beliefs, and you can say, "Oh, I'm glad you're feeling so much better. Like we'll definitely do this more going forward." And then that reinforces in their mind. They're like, "Oh, this PT actually like cares about me. Like they want to do what's best for me." And then you get their buy-in. Maybe it's like, "Oh, I don't really want to do this like strength stuff today. Like I don't really like doing it. It kind of hurts. It's uncomfortable." But then you start to get some of that buy-in, some of that respect as the clinician. And it's like, okay, well, I did this treatment that I don't really think does much, but then they love it. And now they respect me more for it. And now they're more willing to they're being more compliant on the back end when you actually want them to do that strengthening side of it.
Absolutely, man.
Cool. So that'll wrap it up for the intro. So the literature review, this is probably the most I've dug into any of the literature reviews for any of my topics, because I'm a little bit more passionate about this subject and I'm a little bit more willing to take on some of the kind of conflicting evidence or to have some of these disagreements and debates. So the first one is Gary Reynolds kind of started this anti-ice movement. He's got on his website, or actually his website, and he sells a book, and it's called Iced, the Illusionary Treatment Option. So if you feel like dropping, like, I think it's like $60, and I was just like, who's paying $60 for a book that tells you not to ice? Like, literally just look at the scientific literature and you'll see what to do. Anyway, so he is definitely making this narrative mainstream. Dr. Gabe Merkin was the original guy who coined the term rice. And so this is the quote unquote outdated or retracted advice. And so he created that to preserve tissue as it didn't have circulation. So the initial kind of case study was, I think it was a teenage boy or a little boy who was like basically hit by a train and got his arm ripped off. Well, they put his arm on ice to preserve it until they could get him into a surgical center to then put his arm back on. And because they preserved it with ice, then they preserved the tissue. It kept the cells alive. And so then they started to use cryotherapy for other treatments. So rice was kind of born out of that treatment where it was like, oh, it actually like helps to preserve tissue. And so then now it's like, well, does it not? There's a lot more nuance where people are looking at the details of the inflammatory pathways, the pros and cons, looking at things like the zone of secondary injury where you get this hypoxia that's caused by swelling or that's caused by cytokines. You're getting these macrophages that are eating away phagocytosis more than what it typically would have. And so that, again, you have to weigh the pros and cons. But anyway, so Gabe Merkin was the original one who coined the term rice. Well, he then retracted his previous publication in a book, and he put out his own website. That's now he's got an article called "Why Ice Delays Recovery." In it, I find it very unconvincing. There's a lot of like generic sentiment, but there's not a lot of substance in terms of ice actually delaying recovery. There's just more like figure of speech. So especially for a doctor, I found that article a bit disappointing. Anyway, this leads to the more modern approach where Gary Reinl is saying you should have never ice. It's the worst thing you could ever do. If you ice, you are committing the 8th cardinal sin or the 8th deadly sin. And so whatever, basically, if you're going to do anything, don't do ice. And I find it a bit ironic that this is the same individual who sells a product called Mark Pro, a $600 or $700 up to a $1,400 device that does what the body would naturally do if you just go walk around. So I find it a bit of a, what would you call it, conflict of interest. Anyway, so read his book if you want to. Read Dr. Gabe Merkin's publication. That article is free on his website. Gary Reinl also has a website that's free, so you can check that out if you don't want to pay for the book. He's got a million different interviews that are out there on YouTube, on Spotify, and he definitely shares his opinion. And then a more scientific viewpoint, the pain physician, there's a publication, I think it's a narrative review, the physiological basis for cryotherapy and thermotherapy. The title of that publication was like 7 lines long. It was a very lengthy title. So I couldn't get it all on that line, but that's a pretty good read in terms of understanding the elementary physiology of how cryotherapy and thermotherapy actually work. Let's see. So for the media side of things, podcasts and YouTube videos, the Ready State, that is Kelly Starrett. He's a PT by trade, and he is Gary Reinl's buddy, and they've got a video together that's, I believe, 50-ish, maybe an hour, 50 to 60 minutes. And the video is basically talking about how dangerous icing is and how you're going to die if you ever put ice on your skin. So it's kind of if you listen to it word for word, it's kind of funny, like some of the things that they say, like if you put ice on, you're going to suffocate all your tissues. And you're like, wait, it causes vasoconstriction, which your body does naturally. Like, why is ice so much worse for you than just any injury? And anyway, if you just listen at like a glance, it doesn't sound wrong. And a lot of the anatomy / physiology that they present is true or like mostly true. But then when you like start to break down the physiology, it's just like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. More accurately, or at least according to me, I'm going to butcher this name. I believe he's Irish. He's got a very thick accent. Caleby Dougherty, not sure. He's got a video called Thermotherapy, Cryo, and Heat. I think there was an expansion of that title as well, but you can find it with the link that I've provided and watch that video. That's a pretty short introduction into the effects of cryotherapy and thermotherapy. And then for a longer, more, what would you call, educational topic, there's a, like, literally says like module 2-4, like this has to be like a pre-recorded university, like online class video that was just uploaded to YouTube. It's pretty good. There's actually a really good amount of depth, and there's different sub videos within it. So they link to other topics, but this one's online or on YouTube, and it's by Michaela Boehm. And that video, like I said, goes into the weeds with both cryotherapy and thermotherapy, how they both work, the applications, the timelines, the pros and cons. I think she gave scientific literature. I can't remember if she had citations in there or not, but regardless, it's a really good video. Which brings us to the publication review for this week. So this paper is often cited as the anti-ice crowd, or they're saying like this is evidence that you should not ice injuries, especially acute injuries, acute soft tissue injuries. So in this study, this is an experimental design. It was a controlled trial with rats. And so one, just off the bat, that's a red flag for me. Why are we studying rats and not humans? Sometimes in experimental studies you have to, but for things like ice, really, like we can't get past the IRB for ice, which is a well-documented treatment that is safe for 99.9% of the population. To me, it's like, I think we can do better as a medical community. In this study, they took 80 adult rats. For a singular study, I suppose that's a decent sample size, but for like, we're applying this to one, we're applying this to humans, two, we're applying this to the general public. Like we wouldn't accept 80 people as a sample size in a human controlled trial. Why are we accepting it as gospel for adult or for a rat study? It doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, for the design study, they took 40 rats and put them into the ice group, and they put 40 into the sham treatment group. So they took these rats, they gave them a contusion muscle injury. They basically caused this crush injury that compressed the muscle into the point of a contusion injury. One, humans don't have this kind of injury. Like, we rarely see this style or mechanism. Two, the extent of this injury is so much more like relative to body size. Like, they've contused the entire area of their hamstrings. Like, this is a massive injury to this poor rat. The ice group, it was a ice massage, and so they did a figure 8 pattern with it was like, I think it was a 5 centimeter, which is basically like 2-inch application. But like, this is my thing, how are you applying a 2-inch ice massage to a rat with the leg that's like a centimeter thick? Another weird one for me. But anyway, moving on. The sham treatment was, they took a glass beaker, which was the same 5 centimeters in diameter, and then they were applying the same figure 8 pattern to the area. So what they were looking for was, what are the different effects on inflammatory markers, angiogenesis, revascularization, and myofiber regeneration, such as cross-sectional area. And then I believe they were also looking at, under a microscope, what was the maturity of these muscle cells. So they were looking at these across different time points. So they took 4 different time points. And so they took 10 different rats from each group. 10 of the ice and 10 of the sham were at day 1. 10 of the ice and 10 of the sham at day 3, day 7, and day 28 post-injury. So they were looking at basically the entire timeline of the inflammatory pathway. What they found, so 1 day post-injury, they saw extensive necrosis of the muscle fibers. Well, no duh. You caused this massive crush injury to these poor rats. Now they have cellular dying in the muscle group that was injured. They also saw neutrophil infiltration, which was unsurprising given the timeline. This is a typical inflammatory response where the neutrophils are the first on the scene, and they are arriving in that first day. 3 days post-injury, they took another group of rats, and they were comparing. This is where you start to see some of the differences between ice and no ice. And the necrosis was cleared in the sham group, but it was present in the ice group. So the sham group cleared out the necrotic tissue faster than the ice group. So you would think, okay, well, that's probably pretty helpful. If you can clear out the dead tissue, then you can make way for the new tissue. Well, you get macrophage infiltration in the sham group, but not in the ice group. And so what does macrophage infiltration do? They are the ones that are responsible for clearing out that necrosis. So that is hand in hand. You would say, okay, well, if the macrophages are there, then they're going to clear out the necrotic tissue. Okay, so that's pretty unsurprising. We had a feeling that ice decreased or delayed inflammation. 7 days post-injury, you start to see immature muscle fibers in both groups. This is where it starts to get interesting. Wait a minute, didn't we just say that ice delayed inflammation and decreased the macrophage presence? Well, then how are we getting immature muscle fibers that are generating in both groups? Then we get even more interesting at 28 days post-injury. The inflammation was resolved in both groups. This is unsurprising because we're now a month post-injury. We would expect that to be done within the first 7 to 14 days. And then we start to see normal tissue structure. This was no different or not statistically significantly different between groups. So despite having delayed inflammation, delayed neutrophil arrival, delayed macrophage arrival, we have normal tissue structure. We have maturing myofibers in both groups. They made a argument that it was subjective because they didn't have any kind of objective count on this or measure of this, but they made the argument that they thought that the myofibers were less mature in the ice group, and I think they said there was the lack of a centralized nucleus in these cells. But this is subjective and it wasn't part of their objectively measured criteria. This is just the researchers giving their thoughts on it. Much less objective than the things like the cross-sectional area or the count, the absolute count on a stain for things like neutrophils and macrophages. They were just, it looks like it to me. What are the takeaways from this study? The authors themselves, this is a direct quote. Although icing may mildly suppress inflammation and some aspects of angiogenesis and revascularization, these effects are not sufficient to retard muscle regeneration after contusion injury. So we do see a delay in inflammation. We do see some aspects of the angiogenesis and the revascularization process that are being slowed down, but it didn't have any effect on the muscle regeneration after this contusion injury. So again, rat study, small sample size. And even then, we don't see enough evidence to see a muscle regeneration or a muscle tissue healing, any kind of a difference between those two. So even though we delayed the inflammation, which is everybody's argument, is, oh, if you delay inflammation is necessary for tissue healing. This is going to slow down healing. You should never do this on athletes or on anyone. Okay. But the outcome that we actually care about is tissue healing. And we saw no difference in the tissue healing, the rate of tissue healing between these two groups. So we're probably missing something for one. And again, there doesn't seem to be compelling evidence from this study, which is the only strong study that I've seen in defense or against the use of ice. This is commonly cited and people are like, oh, see, look, delayed inflammation, that's going to decrease healing. But even in this paper, they said it themselves. It doesn't significantly impact muscle regeneration, which is what we care about. Do I care if an athlete has less macrophages in their area of injury, or do I care if you think an athlete's going to come in the day after treatment and they're going to say, I just don't feel like my neutrophils are all there? No athlete has ever said that in the history of athletes. What we care about is the strength response and their return to play time, which we don't have studies on that, although the NATA has something that's pretty close, which shows that with cryotherapy decreasing pain, you can return them to rehab faster, and then you can get them back to a return to play pretty fast. It's C-grade evidence. It wasn't very strong in their position statement, but it's better than what I would call this evidence. So the takeaways from the researchers, this was in their conclusion or their discussion section. Ice may delay inflammation, which is suggested by the delayed arrival of neutrophils and macrophages. And it also seems to slow the clearance of necrotic tissue. This is probably due to the delayed arrival of macrophages because that is literally their job, to clear away the necrotic tissue. The ice reduces the expression of CD34 and VWF. These are smaller inflammatory, I guess, if you want to call them that, basically like cells or variables in the healing process. And so the presence of these things are said to basically represent angiogenesis and the healing of the vascular tissues. The ice was associated with smaller blood vessel volume at 3 and 7 days, but it wasn't at 28. And then icing did not alter myofiber cross-sectional area at 7 days or at 28 days. So despite the delay, the head start of the anti-ice group at days 1 and 3, you see no difference at 7 and 28. And so probably what's happening is we cause a little bit of a delay when we do these ice treatments, but it doesn't have much effect on the long run. So if I can decrease their pain sensation and keep them mobile, keep them involved in their rehab, then that's going to play a larger role than the ice is going to. Again, ice causes vasoconstriction, but for how long? The body does as well. The body causes vasoconstriction trying not to bleed out. So if you scratch your hand, your body causes vasoconstriction. Is that going to be the end of your hand's ability to heal? Probably not. So I don't understand this argument where people are saying you need inflammation to cause tissue healing, because if you cause vasoconstriction, you're never going to heal. It's what the body does naturally to preserve itself. So I don't think that there's going to be significant enough of a difference in pretty much any metabolic or inflammatory marker where we're saying ice is making a dramatic difference either direction. I don't think it's going to magically speed up healing or slow it down. And that will end my rant for tonight, unless you've got any comments or questions that are going to flare me back up.
No, I think I'm just really surprised that doctors would hang their hat on such poor quality evidence. And I agree with you. I mean, the fact right off the bat they were using rats, I already don't like that quality of evidence. The fact that it's such a small sample size, and the fact it's a crush injury, which how often are we seeing crush injuries in humans, or especially in athletes? It's usually more of a direct kind of contusion. So yeah, I mean, if this is the specific article that a lot of them are hanging their hats on, I'm surprised. And I think a lot more research has to be done with humans to be able to make a better conclusion.
Yeah, 100%. The specific, I forget the specific mechanism in this study for the cause of the crush injury, but the authors in the discussion section compared their results to a different study in rats where they caused the crush injury via forceps. So they just took forceps and just squeezed for 30 seconds. They squeezed the rat's leg, and that was the cause of the tissue damage. And I'm just like, okay, well, if I got run over by a car and they parked on me for 30 seconds, is that the same soft tissue injury as me sprinting and the tension is actually causing ripping of or the disruption of muscle myofibers? I don't think it's the same pathology, nor do I think it's the same inflammatory response, nor do I think it's the same genetic variables, nor do I think that there's a lot of variables in this that I think can go awry. And I think that this is, to your point, I think that this is pretty low quality evidence. So if it's the best evidence that we have and we want to take the effects from it, even then, what's the direct quote from the author say? Yeah, we delay inflammation, but do we care if the net outcome is exactly the same? I don't. But I think that the argument is that there's no evidence to suggest that ice is speeding up healing, and there is evidence that it decreases or delays inflammation. Therefore, we shouldn't be doing it. I think that's a really just what would you call it, a straw man argument where they're saying, oh, well, ice isn't magic. It doesn't have unicorn abilities, so never do it. Yeah, well, neither does anything that we do. So if we're trying to rule things in versus rule things out, I don't see much evidence that rules ice out. I do see a lot of the pain science. We know for sure that ice definitely one decreases cellular metabolism, which can preserve tissue. because if it decreases the primary injury of the crush injury, right? You damage these myofibrils. The surrounding myofibrils that are not damaged in this crush injury are still alive, but they can be engulfed in the phagocytosis process, and you can actually cause this this hypoxic environment because of the swelling and because of the inflammation, and you can actually kill off more cells than is necessary. If we preserve those cells, however small or large they are, then we can preserve a little bit more, and then we don't have to heal quite as much. So I would argue that if we decrease the zone of secondary injury, then we can actually speed up healing, because we're not necessarily speeding up the rate of healing, but we're decreasing the size of healing that has to take place. The second thing that we know for sure that ice does is it slows neural conduction. We know for sure it slows neural conduction, and a lot of pain science is built around this process of slowing nerve conduction velocity, and the pain signal never reaches the brain because other stimuli are, such as the gate control theory, when you're doing things like ice massage. So ice for sure does two things. It slows down cellular metabolism, and it for sure slows neural conduction velocity. So what do we make of that? Well, we have decreased pain, and we have a possibility of preservation of tissue. I would argue that those are stronger evidence than the hypothetical, if you decrease inflammation, then maybe you decrease tissue healing time, even though it doesn't seem to be the case in this study.
Agreed. And to your point, I mean, if the net outcome is going to be the same in terms of when this individual has fully healthy myofibrils, but we get them back to performing their therapeutic exercises sooner because we decrease their pain earlier on because of the ice, then I think that's a net positive.
Well, you are definitely in the minority, because the peace and love movement is taking over and rice is out. So, yeah, just be on the lookout. It's all over social media where people are like, you don't need rice. Don't ever put ice on your injuries. I think, I screenshotted it too. I meant to put it in this presentation. I think it was, who was it? I think it was Squat University who just put out, he had like a bag of like the gas station ice where it's like literally like 2 pounds of ice, and he put it on his knee, and he's like, don't put ice on it. Do this instead. And he's like, peace and love. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sick and tired of this acronym. Anyway, just keep an eye out. There's a lot of people that are blind cold plunging. They don't know what they're doing. There's a lot of people that are saying don't rice because Gabe Merkin retracted his initial stance. And there's a lot of people that are saying peace and love is the new acronym because ice is always bad for you. You should never ice, and you need to mobilize tissue always.
All right. And you mentioned earlier, I think it always comes down to it depends.
It depends, maybe, and sometimes. Cool. So just to recap, the physics drive a lot of the treatment options available to us with cryotherapy and thermotherapy. The mechanisms of action within the human body are pretty poorly understood, and sometimes they are multi. There are lots of different effects happening at once, sometimes more than others, but you need to consider those pros and cons when you're applying or selecting a treatment. There are dozens of different cryotherapy applications, and those are expanding every day, as are the thermotherapy, although cryotherapy is definitely winning the battle of most money in technological advancements via things like cryo chambers or cold plunges, and the thermotherapy is still just those ugly hot packs that break in your hydrocollator, and then you have to go empty it and clean out your water.
I have too much experience doing that.
That should do it for this week. Next time we'll be talking about dry needling, and I always say I'm going to try to do a double this week, and I never do. So this week I am genuinely going to try to get one done on Friday so that I can get back on track because I missed a few weeks.